better for sound.
Okay.
So, hello, welcome to Financially Savvy in 20 Minutes. I am so excited to be sharing with you today one of yesterday's speakers and today's panelists as well for Lola retreat here in Seattle. Bianca has actually been a part of more than one Lola retreat, so it's really incredible to see her come back and speak to women about money and all things and her travels. Just listening to her story yesterday on the panel, you'll tell us a little bit more about what you're talking about, but I was inspired, and it kind of reminds you of anything's possible and preparing yourself for the things you don't expect to happen in your life. It allowed me to feel like, you know what, crap happens and you can get past it and you can prepare yourself for it. And hearing your story really did make me think that I'm like, women need to hear your story more.
Yay, goal accomplished.
Yes, exactly. So please tell us a little bit about why you're part of Lola, and maybe I think the one thing that really stuck out to me yesterday is how you said having the options that most women don't have during difficult times is what really got you through, and I thought that was so brilliant. And I'm like, how many of us women need to make sure we're prepared for the unexpected? So welcome, Bianca. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
Sure, thank you for having me. So going back to what you just said, there was a story I told yesterday about my mother during her divorce, and she was around 40 at the time, and she told me one day that to always make your own money.
Yes.
And those 5 words really changed a lot of the trajectory of my life. To think, you know, I thought my parents got married at a young age, and they were together for 20-something years, and, you know, had 3 children and everything. My mom didn't see a divorce coming. My dad didn't see a divorce coming, but finances were a major player in that. And hearing that at such a young age, and before that I was always making money. I always liked working. But hearing that made me think, oh, I can't depend on somebody else. Mm-hmm. You know, this is something I need to be able to do for myself. So that was one portion of it. But in the end, I did get married. And I did buy property, and the properties I had bought on my own before I even met my husband.
A high five to that, because I was like, oh, you're preaching to the choir.
Yes, well, the issue with that was when I first started renting, I realized I'm paying someone else's mortgage.
Yep.
I am the one paying for somebody else, and it makes no sense to do that.
Right.
And so I had a landlord at one point that was a realtor herself, and so when I started talking to her, she said, you know, you could probably buy your own place. And I thought, well, that makes sense, but I felt like I was too young at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I
and
wasn't.
How old are you?
How am I?
How old are you when you bought your first one?
That was around 24. I bought my first place at 25, I think. 25 or 26, I can't remember. And I was only there for a year before I realized location is the number one important thing, and I was not in a great location, so I sold and moved to the city of Chicago, which is where my properties were. But so I started buying properties and kept buying until the very peak of the market was when I bought the last one, and everything kind of came crashing down at the same time. So the other panel that I was on yesterday that you were speaking of, I talked about how I got myself into $500,000 of mortgage debt and was making, I think, $40,000 at the time.
Wow.
So at no point would any sane bank have given me a loan for $500,000, but because I bought everything kind of slowly, it never really it didn't trigger anything, I guess I should say.
You know, and I think that is something really important to share with people, because I've come across a lot of people that are equity rich but have no money.
Exactly.
And the fact that you saw the recession, you lived through it as far as investing, and I think that's also really important to talk about now for this next cycle coming up.
Right.
Because a lot of people are like, I'm just going to buy, but they don't prepare themselves for a crash, for a market correction, for all these things. So I'm sure for you, it's kind of like that was your learning curve and you survived it. And then I think it was so smart, you just said you were already thinking about long term that you can be paying someone else's mortgage or for yourself. Okay, so first of all, you said you felt you were too young. Did you have any challenges, because you weren't married before you bought your first few, buying them on your own, or?
No, at the time the banks were pretty much giving loans to anyone, and I was making enough money to afford the first place that I purchased. I believe it was $115.
Okay. So you were fully employed and buying properties.
But I will say I remember going to the bank and them saying that I could get a loan for $175 based on my income, and I thought that's insane, knowing what the actual price was that I would be paying in PMI and everything else if I didn't do a 20% down loan.
And you did a 20%
I did
down.
20% down
Wow.
on all of my properties. So talk about crazy when you're giving 0% down loans.
Wow.
And I'm putting 20% down. I put a lot of cash into these properties, and I got none of that out.
Wow. Yeah.
So for your audience, what wound up happening during that time was I had 3 short sales within 3 years once the market crashed. All of my properties were vacant because I had studios is what I mainly had, and they were kids coming in to work. Well, when all the jobs went away, there was nowhere for work. They all went home.
Yep.
And as it was, even with the rentals, I didn't have enough money in rent income to cover the mortgages. So I was just sinking fast.
Yeah.
Which is how, now I look at things completely different. I thought at the time, if you have 20% down to put on a property, you could afford it. That was what I was taught.
Okay.
That was what the basics of investing at that time. I don't want to say this, but I feel like I have to. I was also a realtor. I was also a realtor at the time, as well as being a flight attendant. So I should have known better. But again, the banks were just giving loans to anyone.
And you were new to this. And one other thing, you're just right. The banks were giving loans to anyone. So this is, in real estate, something they hadn't seen before. Yeah. And I think it's important. You just said $175,000 that they were saying, okay. It's kind of like you tell someone, I'm going to give you a credit card for $100,000.
Right.
Credit limit. Are you going to spend that? No. So hopefully a smarter person will be like, no, $20,000 is the best limit I need. Right. I will never probably use that. But a lot of people for their first home, they're like, oh yeah, I qualified for $1 million. Like, doesn't mean you need to buy $1 million. It's
budgeting 101, right?
You,
just because you take home $2,000 doesn't mean you spend $2,000. Right. You need to save as well.
And predatory lending and all this. And back then, I remember too, I think I'm in California, so I think it was the stats came out that said for every 1 to 7 people were realtors. So a lot of people put that shame on them. So it's like, well, I should know better. It's like, well, you were also learning as everyone else is. So I think that's crucial. And short sales are really important because when you mentioned it yesterday, I'm thinking most people don't know what a short sale is. I've actually bought short sales, and I understand the huge benefit of on that side. Yeah. But losing it, the fact that you also lost the down payment. And thank you for sharing this, because I know you say it now like so easily, but I know it's emotionally, all that stuff that comes with it. But the fact that other people are now listening to this podcast, you're probably saving them not only the heartbreak of the financial, but knowing that, oh my God, I need to make sure that doesn't happen to me, right?
Yeah, I was in a major shame storm during this time. My grandparents had invested in real estate. They were so proud of me for having these properties. Right. And the first time, I actually wrote about it first in a 3-part series on my blog, and someone contacted me and said, can you speak about this on a podcast? It was my first podcast I'd ever been on. Okay. So I was already terrified. And then they wanted me to speak about this thing that's really raw, and it's the first time I processed it was in writing, and I never actually talked about it. Even when it was happening, I pretty much didn't tell anyone it was happening.
Oh, I feel the same way. Yeah.
And so I'm doing this podcast, and I can hear it now when I go back. And I'm not saying which podcast it is because it's horrifying.